Welcome to another episode of Bright Headed Publishing Audiobook Book Club. I am your host, Kelly Morgan. I am very excited to bring you author-poet Fernando Rover Jr. He is going to be joining us today reading from his book, Labyrinth. Fernando is an author and a freelance born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. He earned a degree in English and history from Texas Lutheran University. His writing interests range from millennial interests, popular culture, Black male experiences, feminism, LGBTQ, spoken word poetry, and more. His work has appeared in Odyssey, Caged Bird, Buddies, BlackPressUSA, and the San Antonio Observer. In 2019, he released his debut poetry anthology, Labyrinth. Labyrinth is available on Amazon, and it was also selected as the 2019 Best Indie Book Award for Poetry and awarded the 2020 Literary Titan Award. He has released the unofficial sequel to Labyrinth called Sanctuary. Welcome to the book club, Fernando Rover Jr. Fernando, I'm so excited that you are here with us today sharing your craft. I cannot wait to get into it and have you read. You know, as always, I want the listeners to learn more about you and who you are. And tell us, who is Fernando Rover Jr.?
Yes, so who is Fernando Rover Jr.? That's a very good question. So again, I grew up in San Antonio, and I've been a writer and a reader since I was a child. And, you know, I find that my reading and my writing really is a way for me to kind of express my creativity that I had when I was younger. I'm kind of like the outlier in my family. Like, there's not that many creative people in my immediate family. You know, my mom and my dad aren't creative people. My siblings aren't, so I kind of am the black sheep, I guess, if you will, in that regard. So my writing really allows me to kind of really center that experience and really channel that energy.
That is really cool. I've never heard of a creative black sheep before, but we'll go with it. So, you know, one of the things that I really want the podcast to do is not only entertain with like poets like yourself, but I also want to inform authors and those who want to be authors and those of us who are authors, and especially those of us who have been in the realm of self-publishing. And everybody that I've talked to has a self-publishing story. And so I'm interested, you know, what made you decide to self-publish? And then, you know, what is some advice you can give to somebody who's maybe looking to self-publish? And give me one misconception you may have had about self-publishing.
Yeah, so I actually got into self-publishing because, as I mentioned before, I majored in English and history when I was in college. I went to Texas Lutheran University, and my advisor, Dr. Johnston, she actually was a published author. She went through a traditional university publishing press. She didn't do self-publishing. And so I think there's so many different misconceptions about publishing, because if you think about the examples of what we have as published authors, in our recent memory, there's like J.K. Rowling, who went from like a single welfare mom to like one of the world's wealthiest female authors in Britain. You have examples like Terry McMillan, who was, in the 80s living in New York, and, she really carved her own audience with like Way Into the Tale and different other books, and then became films. And so there are all these different misconceptions about like, it has to go through a publishing house. It has to you have to get an agent. You have to do this, you have to do that. And I thought the same thing too. I thought that, okay, well, I have to get an agent. I have to go to a publishing house. I have to do this and all that. I have to convince my publisher that, it's a book worth thing to do, whatever the case may be. And I learned, and upon asking questions to her, I was like, tell me kind of like what it is. And she kind of told me her experience and how, publishing houses are kind of, for lack of a better word, they're kind of picky and choosy about who they have every right to be, because they're a business. They have to make sure that the product that they're having, they can sell, they can market, and they can recoup any expenses that they put onto it. I totally understand that. At the time, I didn't really understand that, but I now get it now. But I think what is an interesting dichotomy when it comes to publishing and like self-publishing and then like creative autonomy is that when you go through a traditional publishing house, you really kind of lose your creative autonomy because you're signing over and you're contractually obligated to that publishing press to allow them to design the book cover, to edit it, to market it, to do what they need to do with it, and then whatever money comes in, they get it first, and then you get whatever left over. And so I remember having that conversation with my professor and just not liking that, because I'm just like, well, why is it that I have to be the last person to get paid? And I'm like, you're coming to me, or like if you're saying that we want to publish your work, but yet you're going to be changing every little thing about it before, and then by the time it reaches the shelves, it's totally different than what it was when it first came to you. That just left me in an odd spot. And so she did mention that, there's traditional publishing and then there's self-publishing, where it really is on you, the author. Like, you put forth the money to print it, to edit it yourself, to design the cover yourself, to market it yourself, and you're really pouring a lot of that expenses into it. It's really coming out of your own pocket, which I know sounds kind of daunting because, like, most authors don't have money to begin with, which is why they go into writing. But I think it's a careful kind of caveat to say that, okay, while it is on you, like the gamble is on you, you just have to be creative in how you spend and what you spend it on. What I learned years later after this conversation, I learned that, okay, the biggest thing that really inspired me to go into self-publishing is that I knew that by me going into self-publishing, I would have complete creative control over my work, which to me is not negotiable. That's just the person that I've always been, and I am a huge proponent of that, because I feel like no one knows your work better than you as the writer, as the artist. So why would you have to convince someone else that your work is good? You know your work is good. So
that is true, but a lot of authors don't know all of these things, right? I mean, I think most of us focus on the book, right? I'm going to write this book, and then I'm going to give it to a publisher, and they're going to publish it, and they're going to market it, and then I'll be on book tour next month, and I'll be rich, right? And it never works out. I'm not saying that it never works out that way. It did not work out that way for me, and that's okay, because I'm liking the self-publishing journey, and I still have a whole lot more to learn. And so I really enjoy the people that I've met, knowing that I am not alone in what I thought. I'm not alone in my misconceptions. It's okay to make mistakes. And if we all network, we can all be successful. Because as I've said before, and I'll say it again, I believe that there is an audience for every author, and that there is a listener for every podcast. So there's enough, and I'm saying that there's enough for everybody to be successful. We shouldn't box one another out. We should network and come together and support one another. We'll all be better off in the long run.
I agree. So for me, yeah, that's kind of where, and I was fortunate to have someone that I could ask questions about publishing in general. I didn't know, because I mean, you can learn as much as you can in the front end about a certain thing, but until you actually do it, you really don't know how it's going to work out. So for me, when I started, I wrote Labyrinth. It took me about 3 years to write Labyrinth, and then I was presented with the idea of, okay, how am I going to introduce it to the world? How am I going to get the word out? And it took me, so Labyrinth was released in June. I didn't have my first book signing until November, because I was still trying to figure out how Amazon works, trying to figure out how to get the word out, who am I as a poet, how do I capitalize on that, what do I talk about? And that's kind of a weird space to be in, because as the author, you want to stay in the space of reading and writing and creating characters and creating, you know, the creative space. You know, the business space is kind of like over there, but I mean, to protect your art, you kind of have to be willing to get in that space. So like I had to really kind of think like, okay, if I'm going to put together this book signing, what's going to be my budget? You know, what am I going to be doing? What's the program going to be like? You know, what are people going to expect to come to? What am I going to make them? What's going to make them want to buy? You know, so on and so forth. Who am I going to have helping me? You know, is there going to be a food capacity to it? Is there going to be a venue? What does that look like? You know, are there certain rules? Like, I mean, really, it's kind of like event planning 101. It's like, okay, what's my budget? What's my timeline? You know, who's my audience? Like, it's really like the who, what, when, where, why, and then just kind of spitballing like, okay, this is a good idea, this is a good idea, and really just trying it out. And then like afterwards, okay, this worked, this didn't work, and then kind of really learning as you go and being creative. Like for me, with my book signing, I didn't want it to be a traditional book signing where people just come, they sit, they just hear me read, and then they get a book and then they leave. Like I didn't want it to be like that. Because I've been there, and it's not really, because to me, it's like people come to get a book, but they also come to meet the author. They come to understand like how this book came to be. And so I wanted to make that experience be the center of it. And you know, one of the things about Labyrinth is that Labyrinth has photographs in it. So I was like, okay, how do I I'm going to use that to entice people to buy. So I picked my top 5 photos that I liked, and I blew them up on canvases like about this tall, and I put them on little easels, and I put them in the venue around, because I always I'm a huge like art person, like I love photographic exhibits, I love museums, like I love like this where you go and you like walk around and like, you know, explore different things. So I wanted to have that kind of component in the beginning to kind of like ease people in and kind of get them situated and get them comfortable. There's like little like finger foods there while they were doing that. And then once once that 10-minute mingle sesh was over, I was then introduced as the author / poet, and so I read a couple of pieces from the work that I picked myself, and then it was a Q&A session where people would ask me questions from the audience, and I would kind of give them advice as well, or like, you know, ideas or so on and so forth, behind the scenes, backstories of how poems came to be. And then the very end was the actual book signing, where people would come up to like I got a banner blew up of the book and took photos in front of it, and like, you know, all the case may be. So for me, that was kind of, I wanted my experience, my book signing to be an experience, and I actually wanted there to be a theme to it, as opposed to just you come, you sit, you hear me read, you get a book, I sign it, take a picture, and then leave.
You know, and that's really cool, because I don't think most of us, number one, think about a book signing. One thing I've learned about being an author and self-publishing, you cannot be afraid to put yourself out there. You must be comfortable in putting yourself out there. If you're not, then it's going to be really hard for you to sell your book. And that was kind of my thing. I love to write, but I was a private writer for a very long time. And so just publishing it was enough for me. But now there's this whole other, like you said, the business side. And so we're getting into that. But this is not about me and my journey. This is about you and yours. And so I would really love for you to tell the listeners about your book, and then we can just get right into with you reading works from your book. That's what we all came to listen to. And so, you know, tell us what it is, how we can get it, and then you can just go right into reading it.
Okay. So my book that I'm going to read from today is called Labyrinth. So Labyrinth is a poetry anthology that I put together. It'll be about almost, let's see, I started working on it fall 2016, so it was about 4 years ago. I got a chance to travel abroad to Scotland for the first time. I was my first time I ever traveled abroad in general, but then also my very first time that I traveled without like my family or like close friends. And while there, I was in a very interesting sort of introspective state, because I graduated from college and I was in this huge transitional phase of like, okay, I've spent 4 years creating this life that I wanted to, you know, project when I graduated. Now, like, how do I actually make that happen? Scotland is a very interesting place. I say that oftentimes it's the forgotten child of Europe, because people go to like France, they go to like Spain, they go to like Italy, you know, like the common touristy places, and they kind of forget about, you know, Ireland and Scotland, because they're very much wide open space, countryside. I mean, there are a couple of touristy areas, but for the most part, it's very much wide open lands, like countryside, you know, sheep and horses and farms and all that good stuff, which to me was much more fun than like, I mean, again, we went to like, you know, the capital, Glasgow and Edinburgh, like the larger cities, but to me, the more fun part was like the actual space and the actual countryside elements. So while we were there, we were on this island called Iona. It's a pilgrimage site where people from all over the world go and they spend a week there, and they center, they unplug, they leave all their electronic devices and their worries like where they're at, like in their home place, and they come there and they just really they censor, they focus, they really kind of get in tune with who they are. There's like walking meditation groups where they walk around different parts of the island and like, you know, do exercises about, you know, peace and letting go. There was a little bit of a religious aspect to it that, you know, you were influenced to, or encouraged rather, to, you know, pray, meditate, and, you know, journal, and, you know, so on and so forth. So for me, at first, it was great because, I mean, you know, I was a writer, so I mean, I hadn't journaled in a very, very long time, but I was in a different headspace there than I was before, and it was a very interesting week. And I've been in Scotland for 2 weeks, but I've been in Iona for 1 week. So fast forward, I get back to the States, and I was in a whole new space creatively. I felt like the capacity had just been enlarged, and I had the tools to really tackle a really long-term project that was going to make or break my career, so to speak. But I didn't know like how to go about it. If you remember, 2016 was a very interesting year. I mean, it was the year of, you know, the years prior to that was like, you know, Black Lives Matter and the protests, and then that was like kind of like the culmination of the election that year. And like there was a lot of things going on like in our society and culture that was intense, to say the least. And I remember this great quote from the late Miss Simone, where she says, "Is the job of the artist to reflect the times in which they live in." And so at the time that I was working on Labyrinth, you know, there was a lot of, I don't think there was a day that you didn't look out your window or you didn't turn on the TV and you didn't see a African-American male or female being gunned down by police or gunned down by an individual. And it was like there were so many hashtags with so many people's names that it was hard to keep track and keep up with like who's who. And that was, I mean, as a young, back then I was 22, so as a young sort of optimistic college graduate, like, you know, I was kind of in a holding space, because I was like inspired to like change the world, and like I was inspired by the classes I took, but then I was scared because it's like, you know, the very world that I want to like create is scared of me because I'm Black and male. That's a weird space to be in. And so not only that, but there was a lot of things going on personally for me that was really transitional for me. Like I felt like I was an actual adult at that time. And again, I was finally in a space to tackle a lot of personal demons and battle personal memories that I kind of kept locked away for a long period of time. And the reason why I did poetry was because I hadn't seen a poetry book by a Black male author that really tackled vulnerability from a space that wasn't socially accepted. So like when you think about like, you know, men, but Black men in general, you know, oftentimes, you know, we're always coded with, you know, being athletes or being like, you know, rappers, or like, you know, dealing with, you know, anger and emotion in only a way that's accepted by race and gender, you know. It's rare that we actually do it in spaces that are actually authentic to who we are. And so I was, you know, I've always been a vulnerable person. I've always been an emotional person. I'm Aquarius, so like, you know, I'm very in tune with my emotions. But, you know, would that be accepted? Would that be okay? Would that be actually understood? And so I really dove in head first over the next 3 years and channeled every experience that I had, every thought, every fear, every trauma, you know, from my experience with my relationship with my dad, to being racially profiled when I was in college, to losing my sister, to like all of the different painful experiences and channeling them into one book. And I remember when I finally finished it, I was scared because it was very vulnerable, and I didn't hold anything back. But I knew that in order for, we talk about oftentimes if we only saw an example of what we want, then we would do it. So like I would say, well, if I see an example of someone doing it, then that means it can be done. But sometimes you are the example. And so for me, that's what drove me to the idea of doing self-publishing in the first place, because I knew that I could control the narrative and the marketing and the market aspect of what I'm trying to portray. I didn't want anyone else to take my story and like color it up with like what's acceptable because of good business sense. I was like, no, I don't want that. I care. What I care about is the work, and I care about people actually know where it's coming from. And if it's not coming from me, then I'm not doing anything. Then I'm not doing it. So that's really kind of how it all came to be. And so, so it's called Labyrinth, Labyrinth. It's available on Amazon. And it has 31 poems in it, and actually has photographs of pictures from Scotland that I actually took while I was there, because, again, I had never seen a poetry book with photographs. And so I wanted to give the readers sort of a visual treat to kind of keep them enticed in the book. And so I do have a couple of works that I have picked out. So this poem, I always end with it, but I like to start with it because it really kind of gives the true essence of what I wanted to do as a writer. So the little quick story about this poem. So I actually wrote it I wrote it earlier on, and I remember I was writing it, and I remember I wrote it, the first draft of it, right? And I remember thinking like, okay, well, it's good, but I feel like it needs something else. Like, I feel like it needs to be revised one more time. And so I was like, how am I going to do that? Because I feel like I had already revised, because a lot of these poems I actually revised like over and over and over again. So I was like, how do I know? So I went to a creative writing group with a fellow poet here in San Antonio, and I remember he taught us this technique where you just literally write down all the words that are in your mind, and then for 2 minutes you create a poem out of just those words. And I was like, okay. So with this poem, I thought, you know what? I want this last poem, the last poem that people read, I want it to be like a call to action to all the African-American male authors and poets that have paved the way for me, but also the ones that are also coming. And so I remember I wrote down every single title of every book that either I've read, or like I've heard of, or so on and so forth. And I decided to put them all in the poem. And it's funny, whenever I read it, some people that actually have read some of these books, they'll point out the different titles and so on and so forth. So it's called Black Manifesto. I am man-child in the promised land, a native son who speaks of rivers. I am invisible man, spook who sat by the door. I am the water dancer when Melindy sings the weary blues. The ground on which I stand, let the dead bury their dead. I am tragedy of white justice, tongues untied, go tell it on the mountain. I am a gathering of old men on a lonely crusade, the audacity of hope for divine days. I am smoke, lilies and jade and copper sun, fences with roots in Harlem shadows. I am 7 guitars playing my soul's high song, the wisdom of silence that conceive powerful conversations. I am sons of darkness and sons of light, souls of black folk on fire and ice. I am black skin and white masks in red summer, the system of Dante's hell somewhere in the darkness. I am in the marginal recesses of our human condition, the hidden narrows of our social tradition. I am tales brought up from slavery, ceremonies of the talented tenth. I am messages to the Black man, messages manifested. So that was, again, whenever I read it and people follow along, like they're like, oh yeah, that's, like, for example, it has just an example, Man Child in the Promised Land is by Amir Baraka, Native Son is by Richard Wright, Invisible Man, and Film Mountain by James Baldwin. So, there's different titles of different books that I've either come across or I've either heard of, and it's just kind of like a call to action, but also a homage to the African American male writers that have come before me and that have kind of literally paved the way. So that's just one poem. And so the topic subject matter really, it goes back and forth. So I would say the core of the work in Labyrinth is vulnerability, but the lenses are different. The lenses that I actually look at it through is identity, vulnerability, heritage, and resilience. So I look at it through topics such as, again, like what it means to be a Black gay male, how we really navigate the world, really. And I think that is, can't write, if only I could write a whole book about that, because I think there's so many examples, so many experiences that are too hard to keep in one book, but there are some experiences in here that really touch on that. So this poem I actually wrote really early on in the Labyrinth conception. So one of my favorite like fairy tales or favorite like characters growing up is Peter Pan, and I like the idea of, who doesn't like the idea of not growing up and like going off somewhere, escaping the world that and but one of the things that I remember was very interesting was the group that he meets called the Lost Boys, and I found that to be a very interesting metaphor, because I remember being 18 years old and just vividly remember seeing, again, on television when Trayvon Martin was murdered in Florida, and then the whole trial happened and the eventual verdict happened, and then just seeing like the outpour, but also the transition of like race as we knew it going on those like from 2013 to 2014, 2015. And I don't think there was a single Black male of any age, or a father or mother or sister or friend of a Black male, that didn't feel a sense of fear, because the idea that you could be in your own neighborhood and be, criminalized and chased down and then, vilified as a felon, or as whatever the case may be, and you're a teenager. He was a teenager. He was a kid. So that stuck with me, and I remember it was a trauma that really kind of haunted me, because again, always having to watch your back whenever you drive, whenever you walk in a different neighborhood, and so on and so forth, and just never feeling safe around white people and white neighborhoods and so on and so forth, even your own neighborhood. So this poem is called Lost Boys. This is for the boys who never grow up, who just die. The boys who grow too tall, walk too fast, and work too hard. For the boys who dream too big and too loud. The boys who think and speak life, breathing their own curiosity. Boys who try to change to fit in, who try to dim their own light, so they never outshine those around them. Boys who pray every day for normal eyes, normal skin, normal hair, who hide behind masks of deception and dishonesty to merely walk the streets at night undetected. I always thought something was wrong with me. I felt difficult and out of place. My skin so dark and so brown, rugged, tough like tar. I tried to scrub the ugliness and otherness away, the ugliness and otherness of being Black, the burden of being perpetually flawed, the curse of growing too tall, walking too fast, working too hard, and dreaming too big and too loud. I restricted my wild tongue, placed a bit used by my brothers of the night to hold in place, I felt my teeth shatter and each piece fall down my throat, down the rabbit hole, each pain personifying the pain of stillborn questions and answers. I lied face down with my hands tied behind my back. I lay still, not to move or draw attention. I closed my eyes, laying down for my brothers. In this state, in this position, I cause no trouble, I do no harm. I am not being difficult. I am not dreaming too big or too loud. This is for the boys who lost themselves to be found. Why must we lose to win? Why must we die to live? We die face down on the ground. Only then do people say our names, hear our names, and know our names. And so, I remember, so my entire college career was really in the peak of the Black Lives Matter movement. I remember being a sophomore, junior in college when, Mike Brown happened, Eric Garner, and literally it was like a week to week, day-to-day thing, and just having these conversations in class and trying to get our non-minority classmates to understand where we were coming from, but then oftentimes falling into the trap of being gaslighted and being second-guessed and, being written off as another angry Black man or Black woman. So I really wanted to voice that experience because I don't know a single young or old African-American man or woman that does not experience that from time to time. And so I wanted to really give a voice to that. And speaking of African-American women, there is a poem actually in here that was inspired by an experience when I was in Scotland. So again, as I mentioned before, we were on a pilgrimage. We were there, and each time we stopped at a place, there was an exercise that we did. So there was this. So way back in the day when Iona was founded, it was actually home to an abbey and a nunnery. So the abbey is where the monks lived, and the nunnery where the nuns lived, and the community people were around them. So the nuns actually, were out and about. They congregated around one community. They worked in the garden. They worked and they built up the community. Where the monks were just in solitude and prayer most of the time. And so over time, of course, buildings when they're old, they either get demolished or reformatted or rebuilt. So the abbey has been rebuilt over time, but the nunnery is still in ruins. And I remember the leader of our group, she had said that the nunnery really is an example of the role of women in the church, how oftentimes it's the women who carry the role of, fellowshipping and keeping the organization going, while the men are really at the forefront, like the pastor and the deacons and so on and so forth. And that really also kind of mirrors in minority communities. I guess the women that really carry the culture, whether it's like the actual, giving birth to, sons and daughters to carry the legacy, or even if it's like, even in several countries, like in Africa or in Asia, it's the women who, they create, they build baskets and they create and they farm and they're responsible for all the ins and outs of making sure the village or the community runs smoothly. Again, while the men are just kind of in the forefront and kind of just like the face of it. And so one of the exercises that she had us do is that to give the nunnery that feminine spirit, that female energy once more, we were told to shout the names or say the names of all the women that have built, our lives or have, created, paved the way for us. So of course I mentioned my mom, some of my friends, my sister, my grandmother, so many, and I do believe that in the context of Black America, I think oftentimes the Black woman is often forgotten and often ignored. When you look at every experience that we've had from civil rights to Black Lives Matter. I mean, Black Lives Matter, the founders are women of color. So to me, it's like for us to sit here and, not all of us, but like just a lot of experience, a lot of situations I've seen where Black women are oftentimes, again, written off and disrespected and not really given the full gambit of who they really are, or even full credit of who they really are. So this poem really was a homage to that. It's called Mama Day. She is a spirit that awakens in you. It is her light that illuminates your darkness. You are the revolution born between her legs. Do you love her? Do you want her? She is a freedmen's bureau that defines you. so that everyone may know your name. She fought for you on the battlegrounds of history, fortress and memorial ruins. Let her name reverberate through its walls. She wove together the journey of life with 2 hands she used to carry you into this world. She brought the hope with her. She nurtured it, transformed it, brought it to fruition. She never cried, only dried your tears over her own. Kind to a world so unkind to her. She battles betrayal and iniquity with grace and beauty. She is your daughter. She is your sister. Her daughter is your daughter. Her sister is your sister. She is your mother. Her mother is your mother. She is every woman, a force of nature, undefined by the boundaries of humanity. She bears your past and future. She is the spirit and the day. And so these next 2 poems I like to read as a set because they kind of were born together, I guess you can say. They were born out of an experience that I had with my father. My father and I have had a very interesting relationship, to say the least. I always look at our relationship through the lens of a generational relationship because he is a baby boomer, I'm a millennial, he's very traditional, I'm very innovative, he is very conservative in his values and morals, and I'm very liberal in my values and morals. And so, oftentimes those values and those ways of thinking can sometimes butt heads. But ultimately, we are two of many faces of the Black male. I mean, I represent the young for the future of Black manhood, where he represents the past and the tradition of where that comes from. So really, it's us working together that really pushes the future of Black male identity forward. And that's why it's so important, I think, to give homage to our uncles and our brothers and our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers, because without their story, without their experiences, we wouldn't be the men that we are. So even though me and him may not always agree, I always acknowledge that it was his vision and his strength that is the reason why I'm here today, and I'm able to be the vulnerable and the unapologetic Black man that I am. So the first poem is called Sins of the Father, and the second poem is called Captive Prince. Sins of the father does not mean the son shall not prosper, for it is well with his soul, and he is made whole. My beloved, I am your father, conceived and shaped in my image. Do not let my downfall become your shortcoming, for your deliverance will be forthcoming. I was there when he gave you unto me. The trumpets sounded a righteous gospel in your arrival. You brought the light back into me. You softened the exterior of this dark temple. Don't tear down my walls to build your own. Don't forge your path on hollow stones and broken bones. Take your pilgrimage. Find the Zion in you. Take these hollow stones and let them go. I have seen Zion, and it has seen me. I have lived a life of bigotry and iniquity. Just because this exists within me, do not let it consume you. Free yourself from this captivity. I will not forsake you, as you would not forsake me. Sins of the father does not mean the son shall not prosper, for it is well with my soul, and I am made whole. Captive Prince, I am your past and future, the heir to your throne alone. I too command earth and winds, my nobility forged within. Your tragedy is not of my legacy. You have yet to see the best of me. I was betrothed unto a destiny given by those that came before me. Men of my blood have not forged their own paths, have not taken pride in their strides. Don't deny me the opportunity to avenge my brethren, to build their dreams on this land they fought so hard to withstand. See me as more than just your son, some wastrel sire finagled in lineage. I am the architect of our revolution. Our familial paths haunt us no more. No blood on the string. Open your sky and let in my rain. See me in the shadow of your light, all that is good and joyous. I am your bequest personified. Love me, do not fear me. And so this last poem I'm going to read, again, it is a homage to the men in my family. And it actually was inspired by a assignment I did in college where I had to interview a member of my family that was a parent that wasn't my own. And I did it on Black fatherhood, and actually an uncle of mine. And he actually said the title in his, and I was transcribing his interview, and he actually said it, the line in the interview. And so I took that from that and I titled it, this poem. It's called Scattered Roots. We are your sons, brothers, husbands, and fathers. Our pain passed down from generation to generation. Young man, black man, brother man, what do you see when you look in the mirror? What I see is our family. I see your father and his father. I see your brother and his brother. The tapestry of the American family woven together knot by knot. Grandfather brought out of bondage. Carried the American dream on your back, the roots that form the branches of our family tree. One branch became unattached, scattered and squandered. That branch became your son, led astray, wandered into the woods, taking your pain with him. This became our legacy, what was left of our family tree. Passed down from brother to brother and father to son, love, like pain and heritage, can never be forgotten. Very pulse embedded within our being. Love returned the scattered and squandered son, revealing the path others had taken before him. On this journey, he came to know himself. The pain, the struggle, the journey would bring him back to where it all started, his roots. The story of the saints, the pain of the people, memorialized for you and me to see. That no journey is without struggle. That no passage is without pain. No promised land is without the peril of doubt. Our roots are not scattered. Our legacy is not lost. Our pain is what connects us. Our love is what heals us. Brings us home when we are led astray. I see my life, my father's life, and my grandfather's life reflected in the tapestry of the American dream. It's a
Wow. That is
Labyrinth.
really good. I am blown away. I really enjoyed the poem. So do you have another book? Is that your only one? Are you working on anything else?
So it's funny, being in quarantine and, going through this interesting time, I was taking stock of everything I had going on. And I had so many photographs and so many other extra poems left over that I thought, do I submit them to an anthology? Do I, get rid of them? What do I do with these 10, 12 poems? So I thought, well, I'm a self-published author and I can publish whatever I want, as long as it's in the guidelines of what Amazon puts in place. So let me just sort of surprise drop a unofficial, I call it an unofficial sequel, and see what people think. And so I did. This one is called Sanctuary. It's called a Labyrinth Redux. So it's like a revival of Labyrinth. And so there is a poem actually in here that I'll sort of read as a little taste to how it fares when it comes to Labyrinth. So let me see.
So let me ask you a question while you're getting your poems together. Do you consider yourself to be only a poet are you going to continue to write poetry books? You had mentioned that your love of stories. So are you ever going to take a crack at writing a story?
Yeah. So actually poetry I sort of fell into poetry by accident. I didn't go into poetry on purpose. And I actually started fiction when I was in high school. And then when I got into college, I actually got a chance to write for our school paper. So that actually introduced me to nonfiction writing. So yeah, no, absolutely. And even to this day, while I also am a published author and poet, I also am a local writer for a paper here in San Antonio called The Observer. So I do that. It's a weekly column that I have. And so, no, absolutely. My goal is to sort of revisit fiction, revisit short stories again, dabble in like plays, dabble in maybe a documentary, maybe even a film. Because again, you're right. I do love like a good story. And one thing I've noticed is that the medium and how we tell stories is constantly evolving. It goes from words to images to visuals to films to all three in one. It really does go beyond what we're used to. So no, absolutely, my goal is I am working on another project that I'm not going to reveal because I'm the kind of person that likes to kind of keep it under wraps and you kind of see it when it's done. But in the interim, I have gotten opportunities to write for anthologies, poetry, and short stories. So I'll be doing that all next year. And I would definitely expanding my repertoire, because one of the things I remember I was told by my advisor, again, Dr. Johnson, that you always have to keep writing, keep your skills sharp, keep your stories sharp, but also to attract people to your work, because you can't be touring 24/7. I mean, there will be a moment where you'll take a break to kind of recharge, but you'll need to write something new to like, A, have someone discover you, and then B, be like, okay, where can I find more? And then they'll go to your bio and they'll see that you have 2 books out. Oh, he has books out, and then go. So it's kind of like like a continual marketing strategy to kind of always keep your word out there without you deliberately like touring, virtually or touring like in person to kind of keep, because touring can be like talking about your book, and touring can be very daunting and tiring at times because you have to go back into the shadows to kind of really recharge and work on your next work.
That is true. So this poem, this little teaser you're going to give us, tell me the name of the book again.
It's called Sanctuary.
Okay, go ahead. I'm excited.
Okay.
Like a bonus track.
Yes. So this one is called Young Man, Humble Child. Young man, humble child, tell yourself you are handsome every chance you get. Tell the world you are running it, and it's not running you. No, not today, no. Young man, humble child, keep your head up, walk like the king that you are. Proclaim the greatness of your name that is in you to fulfill. Always remember, you were born of great humility and strength. Young man, humble child, set your spirit free. Let this world open itself up to you. Young man, humble child, your destiny awaits you. Young man, humble child, we are with you. And you can also find that at Amazon as well. And yeah, so it's funny. I actually had a couple. One of my friends actually bought them together, and they actually read them together like a set. And she said that it does feel like Sanctuary kind of picks up a little bit where Labyrinth leaves off, but it still has the same energy, and rightfully so, because a lot of the poems in Sanctuary were written at the same time as Labyrinth. And again, over those 3 years, I was trying to figure out which one goes where. So yeah, no, I call it the unofficial, unexpected sequel, because it was not the plan to ever do a sequel for Labyrinth, honestly, but because I spent so much time in solitude and so much time in isolation that I had something else to give before the year was over. So.
Well, I am glad that you shared a little bit with us. I'm very happy that you shared Labyrinth with us. And again, give us both names of the book, how people can reach you, if you have a website, a landing page, how can we get at you?
Sure. So again, my name is Fernando Rover Jr. And my handles on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are all the same, at Fernando Rover Jr., all lowercase. I'm on Amazon. You can find both Labyrinth and Sanctuary on Amazon. And then you could also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and send me like little messages about what you think of the reading, or what you think of the book. Also, leave a review on my Amazon page, because I like to read and kind of see what people think of my work, and also keep up with what I'm doing. Also, because again, I'll share, when my anthology pieces come out and they're published, I'll share them on my page to kind of give you a look with where that is, and kind of keep, and then also check in again in 2 years or a year from now and kind of see where the mystery project is, because I'm one of those people that it's not if I'm working on something, it's what I'm working on. Because I think I always have an idea. I always have something going on. It's never like, well, is he working on something? It's not if, it's okay, what is he working on?
Well, that is cool. I am so glad that you stopped by the book club and that you shared your craft with us. Like I said, I love when poets come through. I'm really interested to know what your mystery project is. So when that comes out, you have to make a promise here and now that you will come back and share it with us when you are ready.
Okay. Yes, I will.
I need that verbal commitment from you. And so,
yes,
great. So thank you so much. I always like to ask the authors to leave the listeners with one word of inspiration or advice. Fernando, what words would you like to leave us with today?
As artists, as human beings, we all have things that scare us, parts of us that we are either afraid of, ashamed of, confused by, and we often want to hide those parts of us in order to fit in. But I think if we actually let those parts shine, then they actually will be the key to us fulfilling, our purpose. And if you don't know how or what that means, well, you're an artist. Find a way. We all find a way.
Thank you for listening to Bright-Headed Publishing Podiobook Book Club. We just wrapped up with author, poet, Fernando Rover Jr. You can get his book, Labyrinth, on Amazon. I have been your host, Kelly Morgan. So glad that you were with us. If you're an author or someone who supports authors, like an editor or a graphic designer, we want you on the podcast as well. Email us at brightheadedpublishing@gmail.com. Again, brightheadedpublishing@gmail.com. And as always, keep writing.